The current conflict between Israel and Hamas is deeply rooted in a century-long struggle over land and resources. The origins can be traced back to the early 20th century, with competing claims to the region known as Palestine. The Zionist movement sought to establish a Jewish state in the area, while the indigenous Palestinian Arabs resisted displacement from their homeland. Following World War I, the British Mandate for Palestine was established, further complicating the situation. Jewish immigration to Palestine increased, leading to tensions with the Arab population. The 1947 UN partition plan, proposing the division of Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, was rejected by the Arab leadership. In 1948, Israel declared independence, triggering the First Arab-Israeli War. The war resulted in Israel's victory and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, an event known as the Nakba, or catastrophe. The conflict had a profound impact on the region, shaping the political landscape and leaving a legacy of resentment and mistrust. Subsequent wars in 1967 and 1973 further solidified Israel's control over the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, territories claimed by the Palestinians for a future state. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, founded in 1964, emerged as the main representative of the Palestinian people, advocating for their right to self-determination. Despite numerous peace initiatives and negotiations, a lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains elusive. The Oslo Accords, signed in the 1990s, raised hopes for a two-state solution, but progress stalled. The ongoing expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, deemed illegal under international law, and the continued violence have fueled the cycle of conflict, making a peaceful resolution ever more challenging. In the late 1980s, a new player emerged on the Palestinian political scene, Hamas. Founded during the First Intifada, a Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation, Hamas combined Islamic ideology with Palestinian nationalism. It rejected the Oslo Accords and called for Israel's destruction. Hamas gained popularity by providing social services and engaging in armed resistance against Israel. Hamas's rise coincided with the Second Intifada, a period of intense violence that erupted in 2000. The Second Intifada witnessed suicide bombings by Hamas and other Palestinian groups, as well as Israeli military operations in Palestinian territories. The violence deepened the divide between Israelis and Palestinians and led to the construction of the separation barrier by Israel. In 2006, Hamas won Palestinian legislative elections, further complicating the peace process. The international community, along with Israel and the PLO, refused to recognize the Hamas-led government. A year later, Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip, expelling Fatah forces loyal to the PLO. This division between the West Bank and Gaza Strip created a political stalemate that persists to this day. Hamas and Israel have engaged in several rounds of fighting since 2008. These conflicts have resulted in significant casualties on both sides, particularly among Palestinian civilians. The repeated cycles of violence have entrenched mistrust and hostility, making it increasingly difficult to envision a path to peace. On October 7, 2023, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict took a dramatic turn. Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel, infiltrating Israeli towns and kibbutzim and firing thousands of rockets into Israeli territory. The scale and audacity of the attack, unprecedented in recent years, shocked Israel and the international community. Hamas's objectives for the attack were multifaceted. The group aimed to inflict significant casualties on Israel, demonstrate its military capabilities, and project an image of strength to the Palestinian people. The attack also aimed to disrupt the status quo, which Hamas viewed as increasingly untenable for Palestinians, and potentially derail normalization efforts between Israel and Arab states. The October 7th attack had far-reaching consequences. It shattered any remaining illusions of a negotiated peace and plunged the region into a new cycle of violence. The attack also exposed Israel's vulnerabilities and raised questions about its intelligence and defense capabilities. Moreover, it shifted public opinion in Israel toward a more hawkish stance, making it difficult for any future government to pursue concessions for peace. The attack marked a turning point in the conflict, not only for its scale and brutality, but also for its potential to reshape the regional landscape. It highlighted the enduring power of Hamas and the depth of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The events of October 7, 2023 will undoubtedly have lasting repercussions for years to come. Section 4. The fog of war, military responses and escalation. In the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attack, Israel launched a swift and fierce military response. Israeli airstrikes targeted Hamas infrastructure throughout the Gaza Strip, including tunnels, rocket launch sites, and command centers. Ground troops were also deployed along the border, preparing for a potential ground invasion of the densely populated enclave. Hamas responded to the Israeli offensive by continuing to fire rockets into Israel, targeting major cities such as Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The group also engaged in urban warfare with Israeli forces within the Gaza Strip, using tunnels and civilian areas as cover. The fighting resulted in heavy casualties on both sides, with the civilian population of Gaza bearing the brunt of the violence. As the conflict escalated, concerns grew about the potential for a wider regional war. Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shia militant group, expressed solidarity with Hamas and fired rockets into northern Israel, prompting Israeli retaliatory strikes. While Hezbollah's involvement remained limited, its actions highlighted the volatile nature of the region and the risk of the conflict spiraling out of control. The fog of war made it difficult to assess the full extent of the devastation and the strategic objectives of both sides. However, one thing remained clear. The cycle of violence was exacting a devastating toll on civilians and pushing the prospect of a peaceful resolution further out of reach. Section 5, a human tragedy, civilian casualties and suffering. The human cost of the conflict was staggering. Thousands of civilians, including women and children, were killed or injured in the crossfire. In Gaza, densely populated neighborhoods were reduced to rubble by Israeli airstrikes, leaving families homeless and desperate. Hospitals, already overwhelmed before the conflict, struggled to cope with the influx of casualties. The Israeli government argued that its strikes were aimed at legitimate military targets and that Hamas was using civilians as human shields. However, human rights groups accused Israel of using disproportionate force and failing to take adequate measures to protect civilians. The indiscriminate firing of rockets by Hamas into civilian areas in Israel was also condemned as a violation of international law. The conflict exacerbated an already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. The Strip, under Israeli blockade for over a decade, faced chronic shortages of essential goods, including food, water, and medicine. The destruction of infrastructure further crippled the enclave's ability to provide basic services to its population. The conflict had a profound psychological impact on both Israelis and Palestinians. For Israelis, the Hamas attack shattered a sense of security and raised fears of a protracted conflict. Palestinians in Gaza, meanwhile, endured the trauma of constant bombardment, displacement, and the loss of loved ones. Section 6. Gaza in ruins, a humanitarian crisis unfolds. As the conflict raged on, a humanitarian catastrophe unfolded in Gaza. The relentless bombardment left the Strip's infrastructure in shambles. Hospitals, already ill-equipped, were pushed to the brink of collapse. Power outages became commonplace, disrupting essential services and compounding the suffering of civilians. The destruction of homes and infrastructure displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, forcing them to seek refuge in overcrowded UN schools and makeshift shelters. These overcrowded conditions, coupled with shortages of food, clean water, and sanitation, created a breeding ground for disease and despair. The Israeli blockade of Gaza, in place since 2007, severely hampered the delivery of humanitarian aid. While Israel allowed limited amounts of supplies through designated crossings, aid organizations warned that it was not enough to meet the needs of the beleaguered population. The international community pledged millions of dollars in aid to Gaza, but the ongoing fighting and bureaucratic hurdles made it challenging to deliver assistance effectively. The situation in Gaza highlighted the devastating consequences of protracted conflict on civilian populations and the urgent need for a humanitarian ceasefire.